There's a generation nobody talks about. Not boomers with their property portfolios, not millennials with the avocado toast discourse, not Gen Z and their side hustles. The generation sitting quietly in the middle. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. Your colleague who's quietly amassed more in their ISA than most people earn in a decade, yet they still act like redundancy is 6 weeks away. Your relative with £40,000 in savings who won't replace the 2009 Focus. The friend who'll spend £600 on Glastonbury without blinking, but uses a loyalty card at the supermarket every single week. Their money habits seem completely contradictory, until you understand what they actually lived through, and then everything clicks into place. And once you do, you'll never look at that generation, or honestly at yourself, the same way again. Picture this. It's 1983.
You're 10 years old, and your dad takes you to the building society. You watch him hand over his paycheck. Same employer, 15 years. Same steady amount every fortnight. The cashier knows him by name. He's got a final salary pension, a savings account earning actual interest, and an endowment mortgage the advisor sold him last year. They called it the golden ticket. Pay in monthly, let it grow, clear the mortgage, and pocket a surplus at the end. Everything makes sense. Work hard, save consistently, trust the professionals. The formula works. You file that away. It's the blueprint. Flash forward to 1995. You're 22, following the formula. Then you start hearing about endowment mortgages falling short. Not by a little, by tens of thousands of pounds. The tax-free surplus that was promised, it's not coming. The product was sold on projections that were never realistic.
Millions of UK homeowners left scrambling to make up the difference. Then 2007, Northern Rock. Actual queues outside branches, people trying to get their savings out before the bank collapsed. The first bank run in Britain in over a century, and you're watching it on the 6 o'clock news in real time. Then 2008, your pension loses 30% of its value in 12 months. Colleagues who saved every month, followed every rule, watching it evaporate. The formula wasn't a plan, it was a lie. And that betrayal shaped every financial decision Gen X would ever make. Here's the first strange thing about Gen X and money. They're the most anxious generation about retirement and the most consistent pension contributors. Study after study shows the majority worry they won't have enough, but they show up with the highest voluntary contribution rates in the workforce.
They don't believe it'll work. They do it anyway. Psychologists call this defensive pessimism. You assume the worst, you prepare obsessively for it, and when things go wrong, and for Gen X they have, you're covered. It's exhausting. It also works. And here's the thing, they're not pessimists, they're realists with an evidence base. They graduated into recession, bought houses before the crash, watched their parents' endowments fall short, and final salary pensions quietly close to new members. Through every one of those moments, the one thing that kept them stable was money set aside before the problem arrived. Not because they trusted the system to reward it, because they didn't trust the system not to need it. So yes, they max their pension contributions. Yes, they keep 6 months of expenses in easy access. And yes, they still feel anxious. The anxiety never fully goes away.
Because the anxiety is the point. It's what kept them safe when everyone else stopped worrying. And that brings us to the second habit, one that looks completely different but comes from exactly the same place. Let's talk about something Gen X quietly invented long before millennials gave it a trendy name, the side hustle. Research consistently shows Gen X has higher rates of secondary income than both boomers and millennials. But here's the part that matters. Most of them kept their day jobs. They're not trying to escape the 9 to 5. They're building escape tunnels whilst keeping the main exit bolted open. The Airbnb room, the eBay reselling, the consultancy 2 evenings a week. It's not ambition, it's insurance. And the reason traces back to a single image burned into the Gen X brain. It's 1995.
You watch your parents' colleagues get walked out of a company they gave 20 years to, no warning, cardboard box. That image taught an entire generation one lesson. Never ever depend on a single source of income. Not because they're entrepreneurial, not because they're ambitious, because they watched what happened to people who believed the employer would stay loyal. And terrified, it turns out, is one of the most financially productive emotional states you can be in. Now here's something that genuinely baffles marketers. Gen X will hand in their notice without a second conversation, change jobs, industries, cities, zero loyalty to employers, zero loyalty to banks, but fiercely, almost irrationally loyal to specific brands. They'll drive past 3 supermarkets to shop at Marks & Spencer. They'll pay John Lewis prices without hesitation.
They've used the same local pub, the same garage, the same accountant for 20 years, and they're not switching. The psychology is simple. Institutions betrayed them, people and products didn't. And that distinction matters more than it sounds. When a corporation wrongs you, you get a letter from HR. When a person wrongs you, you can hold them to account. So they transferred their loyalty onto the things that never lied to them, their M&S staples, their local, their trusted brands. Here's where Gen X's genuinely fascinating. They save obsessively, and they spend on experiences more than any other generation in real terms. Glastonbury tickets, city breaks to Lisbon or Rome, live music 3 or 4 times a year. From the outside, it makes no sense. A generation this anxious about money voluntarily spending hundreds of pounds on a long weekend away.
Here's the thing. It's the exact same psychology driving both behaviors. They save because systems can't be trusted. They spend on experiences because things can't be trusted either. Your house can go underwater. Your car depreciates the moment you drive it off the forecourt. Your possessions mean nothing when the market tanks, as they've witnessed twice. But a memory, nobody can repossess that. The bank can't foreclose on a holiday you've already taken. In an economy that moves the goalposts, experiences compound reliably. They figured this out before behavioral economists had the language to describe it. Now, let's talk about the habit that really surprises people: Gen X and financial advisors. Research shows they're the least likely generation to use a professional. They'd rather read the money-saving expert forum, build their own spreadsheet, manage their own SIP.
But they're also the most anxious about whether they're getting it right. They don't want help, and they're terrified of getting it wrong without it. That tension isn't a contradiction, it's a direct consequence of what they saw. They came of age in the decade of PPI mis-selling. Endowment mortgages sold on commission to people who couldn't afford them to fall short. Bank advisors who weren't advisors. They were salespeople with targets, sitting behind desks in branches that looked official. By the time regulators cleaned it up, an entire generation had drawn its conclusion. The person across the table is not on your side. So they'll read every Martin Lewis article twice, check every recommendation against 3 sources, then do it themselves, because at least they know whose interests they're acting in. And that's not arrogance, that's self-defense. One more habit that looks old-fashioned, but is actually genius.
Gen X keeps paper records. Not because they're technologically illiterate, this is the generation that literally built the internet. But they also remember when companies lost records, when databases migrated and pension histories vanished overnight, when your entire contribution trail existed only on a server in a building that closed in 2003. They don't distrust technology. They distrust technology as the only option. It's called redundancy by design. Digital banking app, yes. Paper statement in the drawer, also yes. Pension portal online, obviously. Annual pension statement printed and filed in the cabinet in the spare room, without question. It sounds obsessive. It sounds exactly like the thing that saves you 3 months of bureaucratic misery when HMRC queries your national insurance record, and the online system can't verify the 90s, but the brown envelopes in the filing cabinet can. So what does all of this actually tell us?
What can we take from it right now? Here's what Gen X money psychology really comes down to, stripped right back to its core. 1. Financial anxiety and financial discipline are not opposites. They're partners. Being scared doesn't mean being bad with money. Gen X proves you can be persistently worried and still build wealth. Not despite the fear, but partly because of it. The anxiety isn't the problem. What you do with it is. Used well, it's fuel. 2. Multiple income streams are not a hustle culture gimmick. They're a rational response to how job markets actually work.
For Gen X, a second income wasn't entrepreneurial ambition. It was a recognition that a single employer is a single point of failure. Whether it's a side income, a freelance gig, or savings big enough to self-fund a redundancy period, one source is one point of failure.
3. Loyalty belongs with people and products, not institutions. Your bank doesn't know your name. Your pension provider will update its terms the moment it suits them. Don't confuse familiarity with loyalty. The funds, platforms, and people who've consistently earned your trust over a decade, those are worth protecting. Gen X learned this the hard way. We can learn it the easy way. That's the only advantage of not being first. 4. Spend on experiences, not things. Not as a philosophical preference, as financial strategy. In an economy that can tank your portfolio, experiences give you a return nothing can wipe out. The memories compound. The stuff depreciates. And 5. The lesson that ties everything together and reframes everything we've covered today. Gen X are not confused. They are adapted. Specifically adapted to an economy that promised them one thing and delivered another. Their habits aren't contradictions.
They're scar tissue, and scar tissue, it turns out, is remarkably waterproof. They still show up, they still save, they still contribute to pensions they're not sure they trust, because what else do? You play the game, you just never forget it's rigged. Remember that 10-year-old in the building society in 1983, watching the formula work. They learned that lesson. They also learned the formula can be rewritten at any time, so they built a version that doesn't depend on it staying the same. If this made you look at someone in your life differently, or honestly at yourself, that's exactly the point. Your money habits aren't random. They're responses to what you've lived through, the economy you came up in, the losses you witnessed. Understanding the why behind your habits is the first step to deciding which ones to keep and which to rebuild.
Here at Monkey Finance, no suits, no jargon, just your money explained clearly and honestly. If you found this useful, subscribe. New video every week. ISAs, pensions, market crashes, all in plain English. Leave a comment below. I'd love to know if you recognize any of these habits in yourself or someone around you. Your money habits make sense once you understand what shaped them. Until then, see you in the next one.